My name is Eleanor, and at 68 years old, I never thought my only son would break my heart. After decades of sacrifice, late nights, and emptying my savings account to give Jeffrey everything, he looked me straight in the eyes over Thanksgiving dinner and said those words I can never unhear. I don't owe you anything. The room went silent except for the ticking of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. That night, alone with my tears, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button if you've ever given your all to someone who took you for granted. Trust me, what happened next might just inspire you. I grew up in Palmetto Bay, a quiet little corner of Florida where everybody knew everybody. My father worked at the local post office, and my mother taught third grade at the elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we had something more valuable: strong family values. My parents taught me that family stands by each other through thick and thin. When I was 19, I met Richard at a community college dance. He had the kindest blue eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. We fell in love quickly and married within 6 months. Everyone said we were rushing, but when you know. Richard worked as an electrician, and I was studying to become a nurse. We rented a small apartment and dreamed of building a life together. 3 years into our marriage, I became pregnant with Jeffrey. Those 9 months were the happiest of our lives. Richard would place his hands on my growing belly and talk to our baby for hours, telling him about all the fishing trips they would take and the baseball games they would watch together. The delivery didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped. There were complications and I hemorrhaged badly. The doctors worked for hours to save both of us. When I finally woke up, Richard was holding our beautiful baby boy, tears streaming down his face. "Meet our fighter, Jeffrey," he said, placing our son in my arms. The medical bills were enormous, but Richard took on extra jobs and we managed. For 10 wonderful years we were the perfect little family. Richard coached Jeffrey's little league team. I volunteered at his school. We saved enough to buy a modest house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. The property had been in my family for generations, and my parents sold it to us at a price we could afford, wanting to keep it in the family. Then came that terrible Tuesday in April. Richard complained of heartburn after dinner. By midnight, I was riding in an ambulance, watching paramedics try to restart his heart. 42, my Richard was gone. A massive heart attack took him without warning. Suddenly, I was a 32-year-old widow with a 10-year-old son to raise alone. The life insurance barely covered the funeral and remaining medical bills. I had to figure out how to be both mother and father to Jeffrey while keeping a roof over our heads. I picked up extra nursing shifts, working nights and weekends. There were times I'd work 70 hours a week, catching naps in the hospital break room between shifts. My parents helped when they could, but they were aging themselves. Jeffrey often had to become the man of the house too early, making his own breakfast and letting himself in after school. Despite our struggles, I was determined that Jeffrey would have every opportunity. When he showed academic promise, I found a way to enroll him in the best private school in the area. This meant no vacations, driving an old car held together with prayers and duct tape, and clipping coupons until my fingers ached. But seeing Jeffrey thrive made every sacrifice worthwhile. Through his teenage years, Jeffrey remained a good kid. He studied hard, stayed away from trouble, and even got a part-time job at 16 to help out. How proud Richard would have been to see our son graduate as valedictorian of his class. That day, as Jeffrey gave his speech about perseverance and gratitude, I felt Richard's presence beside me, both of us bursting with pride. Jeffrey earned a scholarship to the University of Florida, but it didn't cover everything. I took out a second mortgage on our home to cover the rest of his expenses. "Mom, I'll pay you back someday," he promised. I told him the only repayment I wanted was for him to build a good life and be happy. In his junior year, Jeffrey met Melanie. She was pretty and ambitious, majoring in business with plans for graduate school. When Jeffrey brought her home for Thanksgiving, I tried to welcome her with open arms. She seemed polite but somewhat reserved. I noticed how she surveyed our modest home with slightly raised eyebrows, but I dismissed it. Not everyone grows up appreciating the value of a well-loved home. After graduation, Jeffrey landed an entry-level position at a financial firm in Tampa. I was so proud when he called to tell me he'd been promoted after just 6 months. "They say I have a real knack for this, Mom," he said excitedly. My son was finding his path. When Jeffrey and Melanie got engaged 2 years later, I gave them my mother's ring. It wasn't extravagant, but it held generations of love. Melanie accepted it graciously, though I later overheard her telling a friend on the phone that it was quaint, but she'd upgrade eventually. Their wedding was larger and more lavish than I expected. I contributed everything I could, nearly $15,000, which was a significant portion of my savings. The event was beautiful but felt strangely impersonal. Melanie's family clearly had more money and dominated most of the planning. I found myself seated at a table far from the main party, almost an afterthought. Around this time I managed to purchase a small beachfront property through an estate sale of a former patient I'd cared for. Mrs. Winters had no children and had grown fond of me during her final months. Her family sold me the modest cottage at below market value as a thank you for my care. I saw it as both an investment for retirement and a potential gathering place for future family holidays. When Jeffrey and Melanie announced they were expecting a baby, I began putting aside money each month. By the time my grandson Thomas was born, I had saved $10,000 to put in a college fund for him. Holding Thomas for the first time brought back all the emotions of holding Jeffrey. Here was another generation, another chance to create a close family bond. For the first few months after Thomas's birth, I drove to Tampa every weekend to help. I brought home cooked meals, did laundry, and stayed up nights with the baby so the new parents could rest. Melanie seemed grateful initially, but gradually began making comments about my hovering and how I had outdated ideas about childcare. As time passed, I watched my retirement account grow steadily. I was still working full-time as a nursing supervisor, adding as much as possible to my savings. Every financial decision I made considered Jeffrey and Thomas's future. My home was paid off, the beachfront property was increasing in value, and I had a decent pension to look forward to. I felt secure knowing I could help my family if needed, and leave them a meaningful inheritance someday. The first real changes began when Jeffrey received a significant promotion at work. His new position as senior investment advisor came with a substantial salary increase and a more prestigious title. I was immensely proud of him, of course. My son, the little boy who once struggled with math homework at our kitchen table, was now managing millions of dollars for wealthy clients. Richard would have been beaming. But with the new position came new behaviors. Our Sunday phone calls, which had been a sacred ritual since he moved to Tampa, grew shorter. "Sorry, Mom, I've got a client file to review before tomorrow," became a common end to our conversations. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all, texting later that he'd been golfing with clients or at a business dinner. I made excuses for him in my mind. He was building his career. This was an important time for him. He had a family to support now. But a small voice inside me whispered that a phone call takes only minutes. When I did visit their home, Melanie had redecorated completely. The warm personal touches were replaced with what looked like a showroom from a luxury magazine. "We need to project the right image now," she explained when I complimented the change. "Jeffrey's clients might visit." The photos of our family vacations in Jeffrey's childhood disappeared from the walls, replaced by abstract art and professional family portraits in matching white outfits on the beach. During one visit, I brought my famous homemade lasagna, Jeffrey's favorite since childhood. Melanie politely set it aside. "We're trying to eat clean now," she explained, serving instead a quinoa salad with ingredients I couldn't pronounce. Jeffrey didn't even request a small portion of the lasagna I'd spent hours making. Later, I found the entire dish in their trash, completely untouched. Thomas was growing into a beautiful toddler, with Richard's blue eyes and curious nature. I treasured my time with him, though these moments became increasingly regulated. "We're sleep training him," or "he's on a very specific diet," Melanie would explain, limiting my grandmother interactions to supervised visits in their living room. For Thomas's second birthday, I purchased a handcrafted wooden train set, similar to one Richard had made for Jeffrey. It was expensive but worth every penny to see his eyes light up. However, when I visited a month later, the train was nowhere to be seen. "Oh, it didn't really fit with his developmental toys," Melanie said dismissively. "We donated it." That Christmas was particularly difficult. I spent days selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone, including a cashmere sweater for Melanie in her favorite color. When they opened my presents, the response was lukewarm at best. Jeffrey gave me a gift card to a department store with no personal note, clearly a last-minute purchase. Thomas handed me a mug that said "World's Best Grandma," the price sticker still attached to the bottom. Later that evening, I overheard Melanie telling her sister on the phone, "Eleanor just doesn't understand our lifestyle. The gifts were sweet but not really our taste." Sweet. Like I was a child making macaroni art rather than a woman who had raised her husband through medical school. My friends started noticing the change in my relationship with Jeffrey. Barbara, my fellow nurse from the hospital, didn't mince words after I canceled our lunch date for the third time, waiting for a visit from Jeffrey that never materialized. "Eleanor, honey, when was the last time Jeffrey came to see you instead of you driving to Tampa?" she asked. "He's busy," I defended automatically. "His job is demanding." Barbara's eyes, wise from 30 years of observing human nature as a nurse, saw right through me. "We make time for what matters, Eleanor. My son lives in Seattle and still manages to visit twice a year." Dorothy, my neighbor for over 20 years, was even more direct after Jeffrey missed my birthday dinner. "That boy is taking advantage of your good nature," she said while helping me wrap up leftovers from the party he had promised to attend. "You give, and what does he give back?" I dismissed their concerns, making excuses about Jeffrey's work schedule and the challenges of raising a young child. But their words planted seeds of doubt that would slowly take root. When I retired at 65, I thought things would improve. I now had all the time in the world to visit Jeffrey and his family, to be part of Thomas's daily life. I envisioned weekly dinners, perhaps babysitting regularly to help the young parents. Instead, my calls to suggest visits were met with vague responses. "This isn't a good weekend, Mom. Thomas has swimming lessons. We're renovating the guest room, so there's nowhere for you to stay right now. Melanie's parents are visiting. Maybe next month would be better." Even more hurtful were the family events I learned about after the fact, through social media posts or casual mentions in conversations. Thomas's first day of preschool, the neighborhood block party, Melanie's birthday celebration at an upscale restaurant. All moments I would have loved to share. All events I was not invited to attend. I tried talking to Jeffrey about feeling excluded. "I just want to be part of your lives," I said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "Mom, you're being too sensitive," he replied, his voice tinged with annoyance. "We're just busy building our own life here. You need to find things to fill your time to." Find things to fill my time. As if raising him, supporting him, loving him had been merely a way to occupy myself rather than the center of my existence for decades. The year I turned 66, I experienced a minor stroke. It happened on a Tuesday morning, while I was watering my garden. Suddenly my right arm went numb, and my speech slurred. My neighbor Susan found me and called an ambulance. The doctor said I was lucky. With quick treatment and therapy, I would recover completely. But the incident was a stark reminder of my mortality. From my hospital bed, I called Jeffrey. His secretary answered and took a message. He called back 3 hours later, his voice distracted. "Are you sure it was a stroke, Mom? Maybe it was just dehydration or something." "The doctors confirmed it, Jeffrey," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "They're keeping me for observation for a couple of days." "Well, this week is impossible for us to get away. I have that conference in Orlando, and Melanie has Thomas's school fundraiser committee." His tone was apologetic but firm. "Call me when you're home, and let me know if you need anything." Barbara drove me home from the hospital and stayed the night. Dorothy brought over meals for the week. Susan checked on me daily. My friends rallied around me while my son remained in Tampa, sending a generic get-well arrangement from an online florist. The stroke served as a wake-up call in more ways than one. During my recovery, I met with my attorney Lisa Martinez to update my will. I had always planned to leave everything to Jeffrey and Thomas anyway, but the health scare made me realize the importance of having everything properly documented. "Your estate is quite substantial, Eleanor," Lisa said, reviewing my assets. "The family home, your beachfront property, retirement accounts, investments. Have you considered how you want these distributed?" "Everything to Jeffrey," I said without hesitation. "With provisions for Thomas's education, of course." Lisa nodded, making notes. And have you discussed these plans with Jeffrey? Sometimes it helps to have transparency about estate planning. I hadn't, but the stroke had left me contemplating my legacy. Perhaps knowing about his inheritance would help Jeffrey understand the depth of my love and sacrifice. During our next phone call, I mentioned that I'd updated my will. I want you to know that you and Thomas will be taken care of, I said. Everything will go to you both. There was a noticeable shift in Jeffrey's tone. That's thoughtful, Mom. What exactly does everything include these days? The question felt oddly calculating. 2 weeks later, Jeffrey and Melanie made a surprise visit, the first in months. They brought flowers and took me to lunch. Over dessert, Jeffrey cleared his throat. Mom, we've been looking at houses in Bayshore Gardens. It's closer to my office and has the best schools in the area. That sounds wonderful, I said, genuinely happy to be included in their plans. The thing is, he continued, the down payment is substantial. With the market being so competitive, we need to move quickly when we find the right property. I understood immediately what was coming. How much do you need? $50,000 would make a huge difference, Melanie interjected smoothly. We'd pay you back, of course. I had that amount in my retirement account, though withdrawing it early would incur penalties. But this was my son, my only child. I can help, I said. Family supports family. Jeffrey's smile was bright. We were hoping you'd say that. And once we're settled, you'll have to visit more often. The new place will have a proper guest suite. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. A week later, I transferred $50,000 to their account, money I had saved carefully over decades of nursing shifts and frugal living. They found their dream home within a month, a sprawling 5-bedroom house in an exclusive gated community. But this community wasn't closer to me as promised. It was actually an hour further away than their previous home. The guest suite Jeffrey had mentioned became Melanie's home office. And those promised visits? They became even less frequent. The drive is just so long now, Mom, Jeffrey explained when canceling plans yet again. And with the new house, there's always something that needs attention. My 65th birthday arrived on a beautiful spring day. Jeffrey had promised to bring the family for a celebration dinner. I spent the day cooking his favorite foods, even making the chocolate cake his father used to request for special occasions. At 4 o'clock my phone rang. Mom, I'm really sorry, but we can't make it tonight. There's an emergency with a client's portfolio. Millions at stake. I sat alone at my set table, candles melting down while the food grew cold. Later that evening, while seeking comfort in old photo albums, I made the mistake of checking social media. There was Melanie, posting pictures in real time of a neighborhood pool party. Perfect Sunday with friends, the caption read, with Jeffrey visible in the background, drink in hand, not a worry in sight. The chocolate cake went into the trash that night, along with some of my illusions about my son's character. Dorothy found me on my patio the next morning, eyes swollen from crying. She didn't need to ask what happened. Eleanor, she said gently, I think it's time you protected yourself. Love doesn't mean being a doormat. She was right. That afternoon I called Lisa Martinez again. I need to discuss some changes, I told her. I think I've been too naive about family obligations. As November approached, I decided to make one more effort to reconnect with my son and his family. Thanksgiving had always been special in our household. Even in the lean years after Richard died, I would prepare the turkey using his mother's recipe, and Jeffrey would help make the stuffing, just as he had since he was tall enough to reach the counter. I called Jeffrey in early November. I'd love to host Thanksgiving this year, I said, trying to keep my tone light and enthusiastic. I miss our family traditions. To my surprise, he agreed readily. That sounds nice, Mom. We'll be there. For the next 3 weeks, I poured my heart into preparations. I had the house professionally cleaned, corners that hadn't seen attention in years now spotless. I ordered a fresh turkey from the local butcher, splurged on new table linens, and even bought a small television for the guest room so Thomas would have entertainment if he got bored. I made lists, checked recipes, and spent more than I should have on groceries and decorations. Barbara laughed at my enthusiasm when she stopped by to find me polishing the silver gravy boat that had been my grandmother's. You'd think the president was coming to dinner, she teased. Better, I replied. My family is coming home. Thanksgiving Day arrived sunny and perfect. I was up at dawn, putting the turkey in the oven and preparing side dishes. I had told Jeffrey and his family to arrive at 1 o'clock, planning to serve dinner at 2. 1 o'clock came and went.
No, Jeffrey.
I called his cell phone at 1:30. No answer. At 2 I texted both him and Melanie. Nothing. The turkey was getting dry. The sides were losing their freshness. Still I held on to hope. They finally arrived at 4:15, more than 3 hours late. Thomas ran in first, immediately asking where he could charge his portable game device. Melanie followed, carrying nothing, not even the wine or dessert I had suggested they bring. Jeffrey came last, offering a quick, impersonal hug. Traffic was terrible, he said, though there had been no reports of backups on the highway. I was worried, I said, trying to keep disappointment from my voice. Dinner's been ready for hours. Melanie surveyed my dining room table, set with my best china and holiday decorations. Oh, we actually had a late breakfast at this cute brunch place near us. We're not that hungry. Nevertheless, I served the meal I had spent days preparing. Jeffrey checked his phone throughout dinner, barely engaging in conversation. Melanie picked at her food, making a show of moving it around her plate. The turkey's a bit dry, she commented, though she'd taken only a single bite. Well, it was perfect 3 hours ago, I replied, unable to hide my hurt. Thomas never looked up from his game, even after I asked him about school and his friends. When I served the pumpkin pie, my special recipe that Jeffrey had loved since childhood, Melanie declined. We're watching our sugar intake, she explained, though Thomas was allowed to continue drinking the soda he'd brought with him. As we moved to the living room after this disappointing meal, I decided to broach a subject I'd been considering. I've been thinking about selling the beachfront property, I said. The upkeep is becoming too much for me. Jeffrey's head snapped up from his phone, suddenly interested. The cottage on Siesta Key? That's worth a lot now, Mom. The market there has exploded. Yes, I've had it appraised, I said. I'm considering using the money to move into Palm Shores, that new senior community. Senior community? Jeffrey's tone was incredulous. Those places are expensive, and they take all your assets when you die. Not this one, I explained. It's a purchase model, so I'd still own the property. I'd have activities, medical care nearby, and friends my age. Melanie exchanged a look with Jeffrey that I wasn't meant to see but caught anyway. Concern not for my well-being, but for their potential inheritance. That seems premature, Jeffrey said dismissively. You're still independent. Why not just sell the beach house and keep the money for the future? Or help Thomas with college? That's only 12 years away, and education costs are skyrocketing. I took a deep breath. Because after working my entire life, I'd like to enjoy some of what I've earned. The beach house is my asset to use as I see fit. Jeffrey's expression darkened. After everything we've done for you? The room went silent. Even Thomas looked up from his game. Everything you've done for me? I repeated, not sure I'd heard correctly. Yes, Jeffrey continued, his voice rising. Checking in on you, visiting when we can, including you in Thomas's life. Do you know how many of my colleagues have cut ties with their aging parents completely? You should be grateful we make the effort at all. I felt as though I'd been slapped. Grateful? For the bare minimum of attention from my only child? After I gave up everything for you. That was your choice, Jeffrey shot back. I don't owe you anything for doing what parents are supposed to do. I have my own life now, my own family to prioritize. Melanie nodded in agreement. Jeffrey works 60-hour weeks to provide for us. His time is valuable. We can't spend every weekend driving out here just so you won't be lonely. Just so I won't be lonely, I echoed, the words stinging like salt in an open wound. And honestly, Melanie continued, emboldened, this house is so outdated. You should consider selling it too. You could get a nice condo closer to us, something more manageable. I looked around at the home where I'd raised my son. The walls that held our history, the kitchen where I'd taught Jeffrey to cook, the stairs he'd slid down on his stomach as a child. This house has been in my family for generations, I said quietly. Jeffrey shrugged. It's just a house, Mom. And eventually it'll be ours anyway, so we should have some say in these decisions. There it was. The entitled expectation that everything I'd worked for would simply be handed over. No gratitude. No respect for my sacrifices or my autonomy. I think it's time for you to leave, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Mom, don't be dramatic, Jeffrey began, but I cut him off. Please go. Now. They gathered their things quickly, Thomas complaining that he hadn't finished his game. No one thanked me for the meal or the effort. At the door, Jeffrey turned back. You're overreacting. Call me when you've calmed down. After they left, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by half-eaten food and the remnants of my illusions. The beautiful pumpkin pie sat untouched, its surface gleaming in the fading afternoon light. I put my face in my hands and wept, deep wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound disillusionment. That's where Susan found me an hour later when she stopped by to drop off a magazine she'd borrowed. She took one look at the table, the cold food, and my tear-stained face, and understood immediately. Oh, Eleanor, she said, wrapping her arms around me. What happened? My son happened, I replied through fresh tears. He told me he doesn't owe me anything. The morning after Thanksgiving, Susan appeared at my door with 2 cups of coffee and a bag of fresh croissants. Without asking, she began helping me clear away the remains of the previous day's disaster, wrapping leftovers and loading the dishwasher while I sat numbly at the kitchen island. You want to talk about it? She asked, sliding a coffee toward me. I told her everything, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. The years of sacrifice, the gradual distancing, the $50,000 loan that would never be repaid, and finally, Jeffrey's cruel declaration that he owed me nothing. Susan listened without interruption, her kind face registering shock and then anger on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the counter and took my hand. My daughter Jennifer went through a similar phase, she confided. After her father and I paid for her law school, she became increasingly dismissive of us. Canceled visits, forgot birthdays, always too busy. When we finally confronted her, she said we were being emotionally manipulative by expecting her time and attention. What did you do? I asked, desperate for guidance. We stepped back. Completely. Stopped calling, stopped visiting uninvited, stopped sending money for the grandkids. And we redirected our energy. Martin volunteered at the Veterans Center. I joined a community theater group. We traveled. We built a life that didn't revolve around waiting for crumbs of attention from our daughter. And did it work? Did she come around? Susan smiled sadly. Eventually, yes. Took almost 2 years. But when she realized we weren't chasing her anymore, something shifted. Now we have a relationship based on mutual respect, not obligation or guilt. But Eleanor, here's the important part. Even if she hadn't come around, we would have been okay. We found joy and purpose beyond our identity as her parents. Her words resonated deeply. For too long, I had defined myself primarily as Jeffrey's mother, measuring my worth by his approval and attention. Perhaps it was time to reclaim my identity as Eleanor, a woman with her own value and purpose. That afternoon, I called Lisa Martinez's office and scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. Then I began researching charitable organizations that supported causes close to my heart. I was particularly drawn to foundations that provided scholarships for single parents pursuing nursing degrees, seeing my younger self in their struggles. The Florence Nightingale Foundation caught my attention. They specifically helped single mothers train as nurses, providing not just tuition assistance but also childcare subsidies and mentorship. Their website featured stories of women who had transformed their lives through nursing careers, going on to provide stability for their children and vital healthcare for their communities. I also researched programs that supported children who had lost parents, remembering how Jeffrey had struggled after Richard's death. The Lighthouse Foundation provided grief counseling, academic support, and summer camps for children who had experienced the death of a parent. Their work gave these vulnerable children the tools to process their loss and build resilience. On Monday morning, Lisa greeted me with concern. Eleanor, you sounded upset on the phone. What's happening? I explained the Thanksgiving confrontation and my realization that I needed to protect my assets and reconsider my legacy. I've worked too hard to have my contributions dismissed, I concluded. I want to make changes to my will. Lisa nodded understanding. Let's talk about your options. What are you thinking? I want to establish a small trust for Thomas's education. He's innocent in all this, and education has always been important to me. But I no longer want Jeffrey to be the primary beneficiary of my estate. We spent the next 2 hours outlining a new plan. Thomas would receive a trust for his education, accessible only for tuition and related expenses. The bulk of my estate would be divided between nursing scholarships for single parents and programs supporting children who had lost a parent. What about the family home? Lisa asked. I hesitated, remembering Jeffrey's cavalier suggestion to sell my family's legacy. I'd like it to become a transitional housing facility for nurses relocating to take positions at Memorial Hospital. New nurses often struggle to find affordable housing, and this location is perfect. The house has 4 bedrooms that could help young healthcare workers get established in the community. Lisa made detailed notes. These are significant changes, Eleanor. I want to make sure you're certain. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm honoring not just my own work but Richard's memory too. He would approve of helping others rather than enabling our son's entitled behavior. As Lisa worked on drafting the new will, I scheduled an appointment with Michael Barnes, my financial advisor. He was surprised to see me without Jeffrey, who had started attending our meetings in recent years, ostensibly to help me understand my finances. I need a complete review of my assets, I told him, and I need absolute confidentiality about any changes I make. Michael raised an eyebrow but nodded professionally. Of course. Client confidentiality is sacrosanct. The review revealed what I suspected. My estate was worth considerably more than I realized. The beachfront property had tripled in value due to development in the area. My retirement accounts had performed exceptionally well. Even my modest investments had grown substantially. You're in an excellent financial position, Eleanor, Michael confirmed. You could live very comfortably for the rest of your life, even accounting for potential long-term care needs. With this knowledge, I felt even more resolved in my decision. I had earned this security through decades of hard work. I deserved to enjoy it and to determine its future use according to my own values. Back home, I found a message from Jeffrey on my answering machine. Mom, I think we need to talk about Thanksgiving. Call me back.
No επάλεγη.
No acknowledgement of his behavior. Just an expectation that I would reach out as I always had. I didn't return the call. Instead, I called Barbara and Dorothy, inviting them to dinner that weekend. I have some news to share, I told them. Over pasta and wine, I explained my decision to rewrite my will and refocus my energy. Their support was immediate and emphatic. It's about time, Dorothy declared. You've been Richard's widow and Jeffrey's mother for so long. You forgot to be Eleanor. Barbara raised her glass in a toast to Eleanor's second act. That weekend marked the beginning of my transformation. I joined a senior center not as a client but as a volunteer, using my nursing background to help with health screenings and education. I signed up for a watercolor class I'd always been interested in but never had time for. I even joined a walking group that met at the beach 3 mornings a week. Susan introduced me to a support group for seniors navigating difficult family relationships. There I met others with similar stories. Children who viewed inheritance as an entitlement rather than a gift, who measured love in financial terms, who had forgotten the sacrifices their parents had made. Margaret, a retired teacher whose 3 children had fought over her assets while she was hospitalized, became a particular friend. They were dividing my possessions while I was still using them, she said with a bitter laugh during one meeting. That's when I decided to outlive my money and leave them nothing but photos. With each passing week, I felt stronger and more certain of my decision. My new will was signed and filed away. My financial arrangements were in order. My calendar filled with meaningful activities and new friendships. For the first time in years, I was living for myself rather than waiting for scraps of attention from my son. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, I met with Lisa Martinez to finalize and sign my new will. The document reflected exactly what we had discussed. A moderate educational trust for Thomas, with the bulk of my estate directed to nursing scholarships and support programs for bereaved children. My family home would become transitional housing for nurses, and my personal belongings would be distributed among friends who had shown me true care and loyalty. Once I sign this, how long before it becomes legally binding? I asked Lisa as I reviewed the final draft. It's legally binding as soon as you sign, she confirmed. Your previous will become null and void immediately. I took a deep breath and signed my name. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was almost physical, as though I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. I should warn you, Lisa said gently as she witnessed my signature, that when family members discover they've been disinherited, things can get contentious. Are you prepared for Jeffrey's reaction if he learns about these changes? I have no intention of telling him, I replied. This is my private business. But yes, I'm prepared for whatever comes. Almost exactly a month later, Jeffrey called on a Sunday afternoon. This was unusual. Our communication had been limited to terse text messages since Thanksgiving. Mom, he began without preamble, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the beachfront property. If you're still considering selling, I might know some investors who would make you a fair offer. No real estate commissions, quick closing. How interesting that after weeks of silence, the possibility of money had prompted contact. I'm reconsidering my options, I said neutrally. Well, don't make any decisions without talking to me first, he replied, his tone somewhere between authoritative and concerned. These transactions can be complicated. You wouldn't want to get taken advantage of. I appreciate the concern, I said, but I'm quite capable of managing my affairs. There was a pause before his voice softened. Actually, Mom, we were thinking of coming to visit next weekend. Thomas has been asking about you. I doubted that very much. During Thanksgiving, Thomas had barely acknowledged my existence, too engrossed in his electronic game. But I agreed to the visit, curious about this sudden renewal of interest. They arrived bearing gifts. Flowers, a box of chocolates, and a framed photo of Thomas from his recent school portrait. Melanie was uncharacteristically warm, complimenting my hair and the new curtains in the living room. Jeffrey was attentive, asking about my health and whether I needed any help around the house. I played along, serving coffee and cake, asking about Thomas's school progress and Jeffrey's work. The conversation remained superficial but cordial. After an hour of this performance, Jeffrey cleared his throat. Mom, I wanted to apologize for Thanksgiving. Things got heated and I said things I didn't mean. I noticed he didn't actually specify what he was apologizing for, nor did he acknowledge the hurt he had caused. But I nodded acceptance. Thank you for saying that. Melanie jumped in. We've been talking, and we think you're right about wanting to enjoy your retirement. You've worked so hard all these years. Yes, Jeffrey agreed quickly. And we want to be more involved. In fact, we were thinking maybe we could look at those senior communities together. Find something really nice, maybe even closer to us. There it was. The true purpose of this visit was emerging. That's thoughtful, I said. Though I'm quite happy here for now. But the beach property, Jeffrey pressed. You mentioned selling it. I did some research and properties in that area are going for incredible prices right now. It could fund a really luxurious retirement setup for you. I sipped my coffee slowly. I've actually had it appraised. It's worth more than 3 times what I paid for it. Jeffrey's eyes widened slightly. Really? That's fantastic, Mom. All the more reason to capitalize on the market now. I'm in no rush to decide, I replied calmly. The conversation continued in this vein, with Jeffrey and Melanie making increasingly transparent attempts to direct my financial decisions. When Thomas wandered into the kitchen asking when they could leave, Melanie sent him out to the car with a tablet to keep him occupied. As they prepared to leave, Jeffrey asked casually, By the way, Mom, have you done anything more about updating your will? It's important to keep those things current. The direct question about my will confirmed all my suspicions about this visit. Actually, yes, I said, looking him directly in the eyes. I've made some changes that reflect my current priorities. A flash of concern crossed his face. What kind of changes? Personal ones, I replied. The kind that ensure my legacy reflects my values. Jeffrey and Melanie exchanged glances. Mom, he said slowly, I hope you haven't done anything hasty. Family should come first in these matters. I couldn't agree more about family, I said. True family is about respect, appreciation, and mutual support, not just DNA, and certainly not about expectations of inheritance. Melanie's smile froze. What exactly does that mean? It means, I said calmly, that respect is earned, not owed. That relationships are built on more than financial expectations. That I've worked too hard to have my contributions dismissed or my autonomy questioned. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jeffrey's face hardened. So you're punishing us for one argument? Cutting us out because I was honest about having my own life. This isn't punishment, Jeffrey. It's consequence. It's me finally recognizing that I deserve better than to be treated as a financial resource rather than a person. It's me choosing to support causes that align with my values. You can't be serious, Melanie interjected. After everything Jeffrey has done for you? I looked at her curiously. And what exactly has Jeffrey done for me, Melanie? Please enlighten me. Was it the missed birthdays? The ignored phone calls? The visits that only happen when something is needed from me? Neither of them had an answer to that. I think we should go, Jeffrey said stiffly. You're clearly not in a reasonable frame of mind. On the contrary, I replied. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things with perfect clarity. They left abruptly, no warm goodbyes, no plans for future visits. Jeffrey's parting words were, "We'll talk when you've come to your senses." I watched them drive away, feeling not sadness but a profound sense of liberation. I had finally stood my ground, finally honored my own worth. The expected guilt never came. Instead, I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. The following week brought a series of increasingly urgent messages from Jeffrey, ranging from concern about my mental state to thinly veiled threats about contesting any will that unfairly excluded family. I didn't respond to any of them. What did surprise me was a call from an unfamiliar number that turned out to be Thomas, using his school friend's phone during lunch break. Grandma. His voice sounded younger, more vulnerable than I remembered. Are you mad at us? No, Thomas, I said gently. I'm not mad at you at all. You're my grandson and I love you very much. Dad said you don't want to see us anymore. My heart clenched at the manipulation. That's not true. I would love to see you anytime. There was a pause before he asked, could I come visit sometime? Just me. I would like that very much, I replied, unexpected tears springing to my eyes. I have to go now. Please don't tell Dad I called. After we hung up, I sat holding the phone for a long time, contemplating this small crack in the wall that had been built between us. Perhaps there was hope for a relationship with Thomas that wasn't colored by his parents' expectations. A week later, Thomas arrived for a Saturday visit, dropped off by his friend's mother who apparently had no idea about the family drama. We spent the day baking cookies, playing board games, and looking through old photo albums of his father as a boy. He seemed particularly interested in stories about his grandfather Richard, whom he had never known. Dad doesn't talk about him much, Thomas confided. Your grandfather was a wonderful man, I told him. He would have adored you. When it was time for him to leave, Thomas hugged me tightly. Can I come back next weekend? He asked. Anytime, I promised. This is always your home too. As I watched him leave, I realized that while my relationship with Jeffrey might be irreparably damaged, there was still a chance to build something meaningful with my grandson, free from the complications of inheritance and obligation. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable legacy of all. 6 months after the confrontation with Jeffrey, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The wall calendar that once hung empty in my kitchen now overflowed with appointments, activities, and social engagements. The house that had felt too quiet echoed with new voices, new purpose. My volunteer work at Memorial Hospital had expanded from occasional health screenings to a regular schedule in the patient advocacy office, where I used my decades of nursing experience to help patients navigate the often confusing healthcare system. Younger nurses sought my advice, and I found profound satisfaction in mentoring the next generation of healthcare providers. The Florence Nightingale Foundation had invited me to join their scholarship selection committee after I made my first substantial donation. Reading applications from determined single mothers pursuing nursing degrees reconnected me to my own journey, reminding me of the young woman who had worked night shifts while raising a son alone. Each scholarship we awarded felt like planting a seed that would grow into care for countless future patients. My relationship with Thomas continued to develop, blossoming into something genuine and separate from the tensions with his parents. Every other Saturday, he would visit, sometimes staying overnight in the room I had prepared specially for him. We established our own traditions. Pancakes shaped like animals for breakfast, nature walks collecting interesting rocks and leaves, and his favorite, stories about his father's childhood and his grandfather Richard. Jeffrey's attempts at reconciliation had been sporadic and transparent. When he learned through family friends about the true value of the beachfront property, his calls became more frequent, his tone more conciliatory. "We should talk about the future, Mom," he would say. "Family should stick together." But he never acknowledged the hurt he had caused, never offered a genuine apology for his cruel words. Melanie remained distant, making excuses when I invited Thomas for visits. "He has soccer practice," or "he's been invited to a friend's house." But Thomas, showing surprising independence for his age, would often call me directly from friends' homes to arrange pickup times. "Mom doesn't need to know," he would say, a small rebellion that concerned me even as it strengthened our bond. One evening in late spring, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Jeffrey standing alone on the porch, his expression unusually somber. "Can we talk?" he asked. I invited him in, curious about this unannounced visit. We sat in the living room, the space between us filled with months of unspoken tension. "I heard you're selling the beach house," he began. Not a greeting, not an inquiry about my well-being. Just straight to property. "I'm considering options," I replied neutrally. In truth, I had decided to donate the property to the Lighthouse Foundation for their summer camp program for bereaved children, but that paperwork wasn't finalized yet. "Mom, I know things have been strained between us, but before you make any irreversible decisions about your assets, I think we should clear the air." I studied my son's face. This man I had once known better than I knew myself. "What exactly do you want to clear up, Jeffrey?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, about what I said. I was stressed from work, frustrated about other things. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "And how did you mean it when you said you don't owe me anything?" I asked quietly. He flushed. "That was wrong. Of course I owe you. You're my mother. You raised me." The words sounded rehearsed, empty of genuine understanding. I wondered if Melanie had coached him before this visit, calculating the potential inheritance against the cost of a temporary humbling. "Jeffrey," I said, feeling suddenly tired, "do you know what hurts most? It's not that you don't appreciate the sacrifices I made. It's that you don't even see them. You take for granted that I worked double shifts to pay for your education, that I gave up my own dreams so you could pursue yours, that every decision I made for decades put your needs first." "I know you made sacrifices," he protested. "Do you? When was the last time you asked about my life? My hopes? My struggles? When did I become nothing more than a resource to you? A potential inheritance rather than a person with my own value?" His silence answered more eloquently than words could have. "I've been seeing a therapist," I continued. "She helped me understand that our relationship became unhealthy because I allowed it to. I taught you to see me as existing only to serve your needs, and that was my mistake." Jeffrey looked genuinely surprised. "You're in therapy?" "Yes. And I've made some important realizations. One is that I can love you without accepting poor treatment. Another is that my worth isn't determined by your approval or attention." He seemed unsure how to respond to this new version of his mother, this woman with boundaries and self-respect. "So where does that leave us?" he finally asked. "That depends on you," I said honestly. "I'm open to building a healthier relationship, but it would need to be based on mutual respect, not obligation or financial expectations." "And the beach house? The will?" he asked, unable to keep himself from returning to the material concerns. "Those decisions reflect my values and my right to determine my own legacy. They're not up for negotiation." He left shortly after, promising to think about everything. I wasn't convinced he had truly heard me, but I felt peaceful nonetheless. I had spoken my truth without anger or bitterness, and that represented enormous growth. 2 weeks later, I received a surprising call from Lisa Martinez. Eleanor, Jeffrey has reached out to my office requesting a family mediation session regarding your estate planning. I laughed despite myself. Still focused on the inheritance, I see. Actually, Lisa said, his request specifically mentioned relationship repair and understanding family history, not asset distribution. I think he may have consulted his own therapist. Curious and cautiously hopeful, I agreed to the session. Lisa arranged for a family therapist specializing in elder relationships to facilitate. Jeffrey would attend. Melanie declined, citing a previous commitment. The session was difficult but productive. Under the therapist's skilled guidance, we began to unpack decades of misunderstandings and unspoken expectations. Jeffrey, to my surprise, had done some genuine reflection. I've been thinking about Dad a lot, he admitted during one emotional exchange. About how he was always present, always engaged, even when he was tired from work. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that career success was how I honored his memory. But that's not what he valued most, was it? No, I said softly. Richard valued connection. Time together. Being fully present with the people he loved. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in my son's eyes. I've wasted so much time chasing the wrong things. Not wasted, I corrected him. You learned. We both did. We agreed to continue with family therapy, taking small steps toward rebuilding trust. I maintained my decision about my will and the beach property donation, and though Jeffrey was clearly disappointed, he didn't protest. It was a small victory, a sign of growing respect for my autonomy. Melanie remained resistant to these changes, still treating me with superficial politeness that barely masked her disappointment over the lost inheritance. But her influence over Jeffrey seemed to be waning as he reconnected with the values his father had instilled in him. My relationship with Thomas continued to flourish, becoming the unexpected joy of this difficult period. During one weekend visit, as we walked along the shore near the beach house I would soon donate, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, are you happier now? Since you stood up to Dad?" I considered his question carefully. I am. Not because I enjoy the conflict, but because I finally honored my own worth. That's an important lesson, Thomas. You should never let anyone treat you as less valuable than you are. Even people who are supposed to love you. He nodded thoughtfully, tossing a shell into the incoming tide. "I want to be a doctor," he said suddenly. "Not a financial guy like Dad. I want to help people." My heart swelled with pride and a sense of continuity. Perhaps Richard's values would live on through our grandson after all. As the months passed, I found myself reflecting often on the strange journey that had brought me here. The cruel words spoken at Thanksgiving had shattered something irreparable, but from those broken pieces, I had built something new and unexpected. A life centered on my own values, filled with purpose and authentic connections. The scholarship program I established had already helped 3 single mothers begin their nursing education. The plans for converting my family home into transitional housing for new nurses were progressing well. And most surprisingly, my relationship with Jeffrey was slowly healing, transformed into something more balanced and honest than before. On the anniversary of Richard's death, Jeffrey joined me at the cemetery for the first time in years. As we stood before the headstone, he said quietly, "He would be proud of you, Mom, for standing your ground, for making me see what I was becoming." "He would be proud of both of us," I replied, "for finding our way back to what matters." Later that week, I hosted a small ceremony at Memorial Hospital, presenting the first Florence Nightingale Scholarship in my name to a young single mother of 2, who dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse. As I handed her the certificate, I saw my younger self in her determined eyes, in the way she balanced her children on her hip even as she reached for her future. "This isn't charity," I told her. "It's investment in the care you'll provide to countless patients throughout your career. All I ask is that when you're established and secure, you find your own way to pass it forward." She promised she would, and I believed her. This was my true legacy, far more valuable than any inheritance I could have left to an ungrateful son. the ripple effect of compassion and care extending far beyond my lifetime. As I look back on this journey, I realize that Jeffrey's cruel words at Thanksgiving were actually a gift in disguise. They forced me to recognize my own value, to reclaim my identity beyond motherhood, and to create a legacy aligned with my deepest values. If you're watching this and recognizing your own story and mine, please know that it's never too late to stand up for your worth. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. And sometimes the people who should love us the most are the ones who need the clearest limits. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to rewrite your own story after a painful family revelation? How did you find the courage to stand your ground? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect, regardless of their age or relationship status. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' appreciation of you, but by your own recognition of your inherent value. Thank you for listening to my story.